A few weeks after this happened, my coworker was asked to sign a form. I wasn't. At the time, I thought that was an oversight. I've since stopped thinking that. I'm not the type of person who tells stories like this. I'm 53 years old, I clean office buildings for a living, and I have 2 cats and a daughter in Fredericksburg who calls me every Sunday. That's my life. It's a quiet life, and I've always liked it that way. I grew up in Southeast DC, and I've spent most of my adult years doing work that other people walk past without acknowledging, which is fine by me. You notice things in that position. You learn to read a space. I mention all of that because it matters for what I'm about to tell you, and because I want you to understand that I am not someone given to imagining things. This happened on President's Day, a Monday. The building I clean is a mid-rise commercial property in Arlington, about a mile east of the Pentagon. It's the kind of building that leases to government contractors, consulting firms, that sort of thing. Most of the tenants are small enough that you've never heard of them. The building has 11 floors, a parking garage underneath, and a lobby with a security desk that's staffed during business hours. On federal holidays, it's just me and whatever security guard gets stuck with the overnight. That particular night, it was a man named Carl. I'd worked with Carl maybe a dozen times over the years. He was close to retirement, heavyset, the kind of quiet that comes from spending too many nights alone in a building with nothing but fluorescent light for company. We weren't friends exactly, but we were comfortable with each other. He'd drink bad coffee at his desk and I'd push my cart around and we'd exchange a few words when our paths crossed. That was the arrangement. I started on the top floor and worked down, the way I always do. 11th floor, 10th, 9th. The building was empty, federal holiday, so even the firms that sometimes kept weekend staff had cleared out. My cart wheels squeaked a little on the tile, and the only other sound was the ventilation system doing its low, constant hum. That hum is one of those things you stop hearing after a while. It becomes part of the silence. I was on the 7th floor, maybe 9:30, when I heard the intercom come on. The intercom system in that building is old. It's ceiling-mounted, building-wide, and it gets used for fire drills and occasional maintenance announcements. When it activates, there's a faint click and then a half-second of static before whatever announcement comes through. I knew that sound well, so when I heard the click and the static, I stopped pushing the cart and I listened. A voice said a name. I don't want to write the name here or say it. I'll call him the first name. It was a full name, first and last, read in a flat and functional tone, the way you'd read a name off a roster. Not robotic, not mechanical, just businesslike, deliberate. And then, a few seconds later, a second voice came through the same speaker and said a single word. It sounded like acknowledgement, like confirmation, like someone checking in at the start of a shift. I stood there with my mop handle in my hand and I thought, there are people in this building. Late workers maybe, someone running a drill, something technical, some kind of test. I wasn't alarmed, I was curious. I went back to work. About 15 minutes later, the intercom clicked again. Another name. Different voice reading it, or at least it seemed different, though the flat institutional quality was the same. And again, a few seconds later, the response. Acknowledgement. Confirmation. Check-in. I finished the 7th floor and took the elevator to 6. The intercom clicked a third time while I was in the elevator and the doors were closed, so I only caught the tail end of it. By the time I reached the lobby to refill my cart supplies and mention it to Carl, I'd half convinced myself it was some kind of automated system test. Buildings have those. You set them up wrong and they run at 2 in the morning and nobody knows who scheduled them. Carl was at his desk. He had his thermos and a magazine. I told him about the announcements. He looked up at me and said he'd heard them too. He had assumed I knew what they were. I told him I didn't. He picked up his desk phone and called the building management emergency line, the one they give the overnight staff for exactly this kind of situation. He was on hold for a while. I leaned against the desk and waited. The lobby was all shadow, except for the little pool of light around his desk lamp, and through the front glass I could see the parking lot, empty, and the service road, and in the distance the lights of the bridge over the river. The person he eventually reached didn't know anything about a scheduled test. They said they'd look into it and call back. They didn't call back that night. I went upstairs and kept working. The announcements continued, maybe 4 more times over the course of the next 2 hours, irregular intervals, nothing predictable about the spacing. Each one followed the same pattern: a name, a pause, and acknowledgement. I started writing the names down on the notepad I keep in my cart for supply tracking. I don't know why exactly. Habit, maybe. It just seemed like the right thing to do, writing something down when something unusual happens. My mother always said that. By the time I finished the building around 1 in the morning, I had 7 names on my notepad, 7 full names, all read in that same flat, functional tone, all acknowledged by that same brief affirmative response. I didn't think much more about it until the following week when I happened to mention it to a woman I work with named Rosa. Rosa cleans a different building, but we share a supply van on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and she's the kind of person who pays attention to things. I read her the names off my notepad more as small talk than anything else. She got quiet in a way that made me look over at her. She asked me to read them again. I did. She took out her phone and searched the first name, then the second. Then she put her phone down on the seat between us and didn't say anything for a moment. I picked up the phone and looked at what she'd found. The first result was an archived government document. The second was a brief biographical entry from some kind of institutional directory that no longer appeared to be active. The name on the screen matched the name on my notepad exactly, including the middle initial. Rosa watched me read without saying anything. When I looked up at her, she just nodded, like she'd already understood something that I was still working through. I want to be careful here because I'm not a historian and I'm not in a position to verify everything I read, but what I found over the following days when I did my own searching was this. The names on my list were not nobody names. They were names associated with defense-related work, intelligence-adjacent work, the kind of careers that exist in the gap between government and private contracting, Cold War era. Most of them had died, according to what I could find, within a few years of each other, a cluster of deaths in the late 80s. A few I could find almost nothing on at all, just a name attached to a professional affiliation and then nothing further, as if the records simply stopped. What I could not find, and what I am still not able to explain, is why they shared a date. Not a year, a date. The same calendar date, though different years. Some were ruled natural causes. One was a car accident. One I couldn't find a clear cause of death for at all. The dates of death, across a span of about 4 years, all fell on the same day of the calendar. Not the same year, but the same month and day, over and over. I don't know what that means. I'm not saying it means anything. Patterns are the kinds of things our minds find whether they're real or not, and I'm aware of that. But I keep coming back to the date they all died on, and then I go look at my notes from that building, and then I look at the federal calendar. President's Day falls on a different Monday each year, but the date underneath it, the actual number, changes. The night I was in that building, the date was the 21st. I've looked at every name on my list, every death I can find a specific date for. Every single one of them died on the 21st. Not of February, different months, different years, but always the 21st. Always. I still clean that building. I still work with Carl, though he's talked about retiring by summer. We don't discuss it anymore. He signed something, actually, about a week after it happened, a building management form about the intercom irregularity. I didn't sign anything. Nobody asked me to. I've thought about that more times than I'd like to admit. There was a line on the form, from what Carl described, about confirming that no recording had been made and no names had been transcribed. Carl told me that as if he were making conversation. I didn't correct him about the notepad. I still have the notepad. I keep it in the same drawer as my work gloves and my spare keys. I don't look at it often, but sometimes, maybe once a month, I'll take it out and look at the names and think about that flat, patient voice reading them aloud into an empty building, and the other voice answering back. And the thing that I can't get past, the thing I come back to every time, is that the responses weren't distress. They weren't confusion or disorientation or anything that would make the whole experience feel threatening in the way a horror story is supposed to feel threatening. They were calm. They were, as far as I could tell, routine. As if someone had simply asked, and someone else had confirmed, and everything was in order. As if this was something that happened regularly. As if I was the only one in that building who didn't already know about it. I've been asked a few times why I stopped teaching. I always give a short answer because the real one takes a while and it doesn't land the way people expect. They expect something personal, burnout, a difficult class, administration problems. It was none of those things. It was one afternoon in February, in a building I'd been to before, on a trip I'd run before, where something happened that I still can't account for, and that an official state investigation also, if you read it closely enough, cannot fully account for either. I was 34 when it happened. I'd been teaching 8th grade social studies at Maplewood Middle School for going on 6 years, which sounds like a long time until you realize most of the teachers there had been there since before I was born. I wasn't young exactly, but I wasn't settled either. My apartment was still furnished with things I'd bought at Target in my mid-20s because I assumed I'd replace them eventually. I hadn't. I tell you this because it matters, the kind of person I was then. Cautious, practical, not prone to reading things into situations. The trip was scheduled for President's Day weekend, a Friday field trip to the Pennsylvania state capitol in Harrisburg. 42 7th graders, 2 chaperones, myself, and a colleague of mine named Diane who taught English on the 2nd floor and had the unfortunate habit of drinking coffee that smelled like burnt plastic. We'd done this trip before. Different kids, same itinerary. You park in the lot on Commonwealth Avenue, you walk them through the main rotunda, you talk about the murals, you eat lunch in the basement cafeteria, you walk through whichever wing the docent thinks is appropriate for your age group, and you're back on the bus by 2:30. It's a half day. Nothing exciting. I remember the morning being gray. February in central Pennsylvania is just gray. Flat sky, dead grass, salt stains on every curb. The kids were the usual mixture of annoyed to be awake and genuinely excited in that performative way middle schoolers have, where they don't want to seem like they care. We loaded onto the charter bus at 7:50, did head count twice because Diane always did head count twice, and pulled out of the school lot at 8:04. The drive was about an hour and 10 minutes. I sat near the front. A kid named Marcus kept asking if we'd see the governor. I told him probably not. He asked 3 more times. We arrived without incident. The Capitol itself is legitimately beautiful, I'll say that. The dome is modeled after St. Peter's in Rome, or that's what the docents always say. The inside has this particular echo to it, a kind of soft resonance that makes everything sound both closer and farther away than it actually is. I've always found it slightly disorienting, but pleasantly so, like the building is a little bigger on the inside than it looks. Our docent that day was a woman named, and I wrote this down later, Karen Sheets. She was probably 50, wore a state employee lanyard, and moved the way people move when they've explained the same 7 rooms to the same 40 children 300 times. Efficient, not unkind. She took us through the main rotunda, the House chamber, the governor's reception room, standard. Then, at some point during the transition between the reception room and whatever was supposed to come next, our group got split. I want to be precise about this because I've been over it many times. There was a hallway leading off from the east side of the reception room, past a set of propped open fire doors. A portion of the group, maybe 15 or 16 students, went through those doors following a staff member. Not Karen Sheets, someone else, a younger man in a similar lanyard, before Diane or I fully registered what was happening. We were managing the usual churn of a group that size. Someone had dropped a water bottle, there was a brief thing about a phone. By the time I looked up, the doors were closing. I want to be clear, I wasn't panicked. I assumed it was a planned extension of the tour, that another staffer was conducting a parallel portion. Diane thought the same. We took our group through the main route and figured we'd reconnect at lunch in the basement cafeteria at noon. That's what I told myself. That's the story I ran for about 45 minutes before it stopped being comfortable. They weren't there at noon. Karen Sheets seemed mildly confused when I asked about the second group. She said she wasn't aware of any additional routing that day. She made some calls on her radio. Nobody came back to us with a direct answer. The man I described, younger, similar lanyard, she said she didn't recognize the description specifically, but there were a lot of seasonal staff. I kept expecting someone to come around a corner with 20 kids and an apology for the confusion. By 1 o'clock, building security was involved. By 1:30, HBPD was there. By 2, I had called the school principal from a bench in the main rotunda and could not fully explain what I was telling him because I didn't have an explanation. The kids had been there, then they weren't. There was no record of them exiting the building. There was no record of any additional tour routing for our group that day. The man with the lanyard remained vague. 2 security staff thought they might have seen him, 1 thought she had not. The bus left empty. I mean that literally. At 2:30, the driver, who did not know anything had happened, performed his departure protocol, determined all adults were off the bus, and drove back to the school because those were his instructions. He later said he'd confirmed with me. I have no memory of this. He showed me a text on his phone from my number saying we were clear to go. I don't know when I sent that text. My phone showed it in the outbox, but I have no memory of sending it. It's the kind of thing I've turned over in my mind probably more than I should. The children's backpacks were on the bus, all 42, including the ones who had been with me the entire time. Mine were with me the whole day. None of them had their bags. The 22 students who had followed the man with the lanyard were found at 4:47 that afternoon in a maintenance corridor on what building schematics listed as the 3rd floor, Sub-Annex B. I looked up Sub-Annex B later. It does not appear on the public-facing Capitol map. It does not appear on the archived renovation maps I was able to find through the State Historical Society's digital collection. A maintenance supervisor told investigators it was a decommissioned utility space that had been sealed during a 1990 renovation. The door they came out of was, according to that same supervisor, not supposed to open from the inside. All 22 children were physically unharmed. They were assessed at the scene and later at a hospital. No injuries. They were, however, quieter than they should have been. Not frightened exactly. Quiet in a way that's harder to describe. Compliant. Several of them asked, independently and without apparent coordination, what time it was. The voicemails came out during the subsequent investigation. 3 students had called numbers, parents in 2 cases, a home line in 1, during the period they were missing. The calls were time-stamped between 4 and 5 p.m., which is to say they were placed before the children were found, which is consistent with the timeline. But 2 of the voicemails referenced things that had not happened yet at the time they were placed. One girl, Maya, left a message for her mother that described getting back on the bus. She described sitting next to a boy named Devin and said Devin had spilled his juice box. That happened. The spill happened after they were found, on the return drive. Maya, when asked, said she remembered leaving the message but could not explain the content. She said she thought she was just saying what she pictured happening. The investigation was conducted by the state and concluded approximately 4 months later. The findings cited inadequate staff coordination, an unofficial tour extension that had not been properly approved, and a failure in documentation protocol. The man with the lanyard was never specifically identified, though the report characterized the incident as the result of a temporary staff member acting outside their role. No charges were filed. The Capitol revised its group tour policy. I read the full report twice. It answers the factual sequence of events in a way that is internally consistent if you don't push on any individual piece too hard. I left teaching the following school year. Not because of this, or not only because of this. I work in curriculum development now. Remote, mostly. I don't think about it constantly. I've gotten better at that. What I think about when I do think about it is something one of the quieter kids said when they came out of that corridor. A boy named Daniel, who I'd always found a little inscrutable. Not troubled, just inward. He was standing near the back of the group while adults were making calls and doing head counts, and he said to nobody in particular, in a perfectly conversational voice, that the room they'd been in was very clean, that it smelled like nothing. He said the man had shown them chairs and told them to sit, and that they'd done some kind of lesson, though he couldn't say what the lesson was about. He said it felt like a short time. The rest of them were found at 4:47. They'd been missing since approximately 11:15 that morning, 5.5 hours. Daniel said it felt like a short time. I think about the timestamp on that voicemail. I think about the bus that drove away empty. I think about the door that wasn't supposed to open from the inside, and the room that wasn't supposed to exist, and the man I half saw moving through a crowd of children before a set of fire doors closed behind them. I don't have a version of events that makes everything fit. I've tried. I'm a methodical person, and I've tried. The Capitol is still there. They still do student tours. I looked it up recently, and the group tour page has been updated. New photos, smiling kids in front of the rotunda. The dome really is beautiful. I'll stand by that. I just wonder sometimes, when I see those photos, whether any of those particular rooms are on the map. The first thing you need to understand is that it was my voice on the recordings, not someone else's. Mine. I've sat with that fact for almost a year now, and it still hasn't gotten easier to explain than it was the morning I found the first one. To explain it properly, I have to go back a few weeks. I was 26 when I took the job, and I'll be honest, I took it because I needed to disappear for a while. Not from anything dramatic, just from my life. I'd been in retail management in Rapid City for 4 years, sleeping badly, calling my mother less and less, and one afternoon I quit without giving notice and drove west on 44 until the Black Hills started. The seasonal position at the Park Service paid next to nothing and mostly involved walking around in the cold checking things. That was fine. I needed something that asked nothing except that I be physically present. Keystone, in November, is not the same town you see in pictures. The ice cream shops are boarded up. Half the motels have a single car in the lot. At night, the whole stretch of 16A goes dark except for the occasional snowplow. I was renting a room from a woman named Debbie who owned a property behind the Moose Landing Bar, and she'd leave soup in the fridge and not ask questions. I liked her a lot. My job had a few different components. During the day, I helped with interpretive signage and pathway maintenance. But starting the second week of November, they added an inspection rotation. Ice monitoring near the Avenue of Flags and along the base of the mountain. Cold had come in early and ice was forming in unexpected places. A drainage issue near one of the old structural anchors had created a seep that was freezing in odd formations, lower on the rock face, and park management wanted someone to photograph it weekly and flag anything that looked like stress fractures. I wasn't a geologist, I just had to look and document. The inspections were done after hours, after the monument lit up and then went dark. That happened at 9. I'd go in around 9:15 once the last visitors were cleared. I had a badge and a code and a flashlight and a camera. The first few times were uneventful, cold, quiet, a little eerie. The faces are strange at night, that's not a revelation. They're proportioned for viewing from a distance during daylight, so up close in the dark they don't resolve the way you expect. You're always a little below the angle, you get a lot of forehead and not much else. The third inspection was when I noticed something different. I had my flashlight angled upward along the drainage seep, which had grown significantly. The ice had built in layers and, by the third week, had formed a shelf maybe 8 feet wide across a section of the lower rock face. I was photographing the edge of it when the angle of my light caught something in the surface texture of the ice. I stopped. At first, I thought I was pattern matching. The human brain does that constantly, finds faces in wood grain, clouds, the texture of popcorn ceilings. I kept reminding myself of that, but the longer I held the flashlight still, the harder it became to unsee. The ice was not smooth. It had frozen in layers over irregular rock, and the contours had produced a topography of ridges and depressions that, in that specific angle of light, suggested a face. Not vaguely, not the way a cloud does. It had depth, a brow, the strong raised line of a nose, something that sat where cheekbones would be. And the proportions of it, the way the features were spaced, did not feel random. I moved my flashlight. The impression shifted and mostly dissolved. I moved it back, and it returned. I photographed it from the exact position where it was most visible. Then I moved on because it was 9 degrees and I was shaking. I told myself the whole drive back that I was tired and cold and my brain was doing what brains do. I looked at the photo on my camera's small screen and couldn't make it out clearly. I decided to forget about it. That was a Thursday. The following Monday, I woke up and reached for my phone to check the time and saw that my voice memo app had a new recording. I use voice memos occasionally. Grocery lists, reminders, notes about things I want to look up. I didn't remember making one. The file was timestamped 2:47 a.m. I sat up. I don't have a sleepwalking history. I lived alone in a single room, and the walls were thin enough that Debbie, a light sleeper, would have heard me moving around. I pressed play. What came out of the speaker was my voice. I know how my voice sounds in recordings, the slightly higher register, the way I over-enunciate when I'm tired. It was my voice, and it was reciting something. I didn't recognize it at first. It took almost 30 seconds because the words were coming out in the wrong order. The rhythm was strange. The syntax kept resolving backward, like I was listening to a sentence spoken from its period to its capital letter. I had to replay it twice before my brain registered what it was. The Gettysburg Address, reversed. Word by word, not letter by letter. Each word intelligible, but the sequence running from the final word to the first. Nation the from perish shall. That's not how anyone talks in their sleep. To reverse a speech word by word, you have to either know it perfectly and work backwards, or you have to be reading from a text and going line by line in reverse. Neither of those things happens during unconscious recording at 3 in the morning. I went to work. I told myself there was an explanation. There is always an explanation. The next recording appeared 2 nights later, same approximate time. When I reversed the playback using an app I downloaded for this purpose, what I heard was a portion of Washington's first inaugural address, the section about the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie in the dark listening for any sound from my own phone, straining for the ambient hiss of the voice memo app opening. I heard nothing. I went back on my next scheduled inspection and told myself I would look at the ice formation objectively and confirm that what I'd seen was a perceptual artifact. The ice had grown. Whatever drainage was feeding it had continued through the week, and the formation was now considerably thicker, more complex. It had built up in a way I can only describe as structured. The face I had photographed was still there. Same angle, same flashlight position. If anything, the subsequent freeze had reinforced the contours, but it had also expanded, and now, in the same narrow band of light, there was something adjacent to it. A second face beginning to emerge. I took photographs. I logged everything. My hands were steady. What I didn't log was what I noticed when I scrolled back through the older photos. I had not photographed the first face straight on. I'd been standing slightly left. The face had been peripheral, partly obscured by shadow. In the current photo, taken from the same position, the face was centered, fully in frame, looking directly at where I was standing. I drove back to Debbie's. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. There is an explanation for what the photos show. Freeze-thaw cycles alter surface contours. Memory is not a recording. I know this. I submitted my report that week. I did not flag anything unusual. A week later, I found a third recording, 3:04 a.m. When I reversed it, I recognized it immediately. Lincoln's second inaugural address, with malice toward none, with charity for all. I have those recordings still. My voice is calm on all of them, focused, quiet, almost pleased. I finished the season and left in January. The voice memos have not recurred since I left Keystone. The night before I found the first recording, I had told no one about the face in the ice. The Gettysburg Address is engraved on tablets at the Mount Rushmore Memorial. Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt. The tablet for the Gettysburg Address sits near the end of the Avenue of Flags, close to where the drainage seep originates. I stood next to it every inspection. That's the explanation I use. What I think about sometimes, just occasionally at the wrong hour, is the second face. Whether the ice kept building through February, and whether, if you stood there now with a flashlight held at the right angle, you would see it clearly, and whether it would be facing you. The unsettling part wasn't the stranger. It was how I behaved. I was 23 and still figuring out what being done with school actually meant. I'd driven down to Lubbock for President's Day weekend to see my parents. Stayed one night longer than I planned because my mom made that casserole I always ask for, and by the time I finally got on the road, it was already mid-morning on Tuesday. I wasn't in any rush. I didn't have anywhere to be. That was still new enough that it made me uneasy, that kind of openness. No due dates, no schedule. I had a job lined up, a graduate position starting in April, but for now I was just a person in a car on a flat gray highway, which should have felt like freedom and mostly just felt like suspension. I was driving north on 27, then picked up 87 past Tulia, and somewhere in that dead stretch before Amarillo, the roads flatten out so completely that your eyes start sliding off the horizon. I had the heat running too high. I'd been awake since 7, but already felt like I'd been driving forever, which happens out there. The landscape doesn't give you anything to push against. I'd had a large coffee from a drive-thru in Plainview and finished it too fast, and now I had that flat, used-up feeling you get in the middle of a long drive when the caffeine is gone and you still have miles to cover and the scenery isn't changing. I had a playlist on, but had stopped hearing it. I noticed the sign around mile marker 46. It was the orange temporary kind, the diamond shape with the black text, staked into the gravel shoulder. It said detour and had an arrow pointing right, onto what looked like a county road. Below it, a second sign, executive route. I'd never seen that phrasing on a detour sign before, but I wasn't thinking hard about it. I assumed there was construction ahead. I turned right. The county road was paved, barely. 2 narrow lanes, no markings, a ripple of old asphalt that made the car hum in a low, uneven way. There was nothing out there. Not in the dismissive way people say that about rural Texas. Genuinely nothing. A few bare fields, one old stock tank with the water showing green and flat, a grain elevator in the distance that never seemed to get closer. No other cars. I passed a rusted gate leaning open onto a dirt 2-track. A telephone line ran parallel to the road on the west side and then just stopped, the last pole standing by itself with the wire going nowhere. I'd been on the detour maybe 8 minutes when my phone lost signal. That happens out there too, so I noted it and kept driving. The road curved slightly south, which felt wrong if I was trying to get back to 87, but I figured it would loop. These things always loop. Then it straightened again, and I could see a vehicle parked to the side of the road maybe half a mile ahead. Dark SUV, no markings I could make out. As I got closer, I saw a man standing beside it, facing my direction. He was wearing a dark jacket and khakis, no uniform that I recognized, no safety vest, nothing official. He raised a hand, and I slowed automatically, because that's what you do. Someone signals you, and you slow. I rolled down my window. He was maybe 50. Trim, with the kind of deliberate stillness that doesn't come from being relaxed. He smiled, but it was the smile of someone performing an action, not feeling one. He said my name. Not a question. He said it the way you say someone's name when you're confirming it out loud to yourself, except he said it to me, looking at me through my open window. I said something like, "Yes, that's me," and my voice came out steady, which surprises me when I think about it now. He nodded, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. He said there was a brief stop ahead, that it would only take a few minutes, and asked me to pull forward to the marker and wait. He gestured up the road. I could see a small orange cone about 200 yards ahead. I asked what was going on. He said it was a brief hold, a planned interruption, and that I'd be back on my way shortly. His voice was measured in a way that foreclosed follow-up. Not rude, not threatening, just final, like someone who is used to people accepting what he said. I pulled forward. I don't know why I pulled forward. I've thought about this a lot. I wasn't frightened yet, not really. I was confused and slightly annoyed and running on the ambient assumption that adults with that kind of bearing generally have a reason for what they're doing. I pulled up to the cone and stopped the car. There was nothing ahead of me, just road, just field, just that same grain elevator that still looked exactly as far away as it had 10 minutes ago. I waited. The car idled, the heat was still running, and it was making the air taste stale. I turned it off and cracked the other window and could hear the wind crossing the open fields, a low, steady sound that didn't change pitch. A bird landed on the cone ahead of me and left. I watched the SUV in my rearview mirror and it didn't move. No other vehicles came from behind me. The man in the jacket had gotten back into the SUV and was just a silhouette behind the glass. I tried my phone again, still no signal. After what felt like 5 minutes, maybe a little more, a different vehicle came from the north. Black, large, tinted windows, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. It slowed as it passed me. I watched it in my side mirror. It didn't stop. It continued south without any sign that it noticed me, or that it needed to. I could hear the low hiss of tires, then nothing. About 30 seconds later, the man in the jacket pulled up alongside me and said I was good to go. He pointed north, said the road would reconnect in about 4 miles. He smiled again. I said, "Thank you." I have no idea why I said thank you. I drove north. The road reconnected to 87 exactly where he'd said it would. My phone signal came back, my navigation app reoriented, recalculated, and I could see in the small summary bar at the bottom that I'd added 22 minutes to my trip. I didn't think much about that until later. I stopped for gas in Amarillo, went inside, bought a coffee I didn't really want, and sat in the parking lot for a while. I watched a family loading up a minivan 3 spaces over. Kids arguing about something. Normal sounds. I was trying to decide how I felt about what had happened, and I couldn't quite land on it. I thought about calling someone, my dad maybe, and then I thought about what I would say and realized I didn't have a version of it that didn't sound like I'd imagined the whole thing, so I didn't call anyone. I knew it wasn't nothing. The sign, the man, the knowing my name. That last part was what I kept circling. The sign could have been real, could have been some kind of emergency routing I'd never heard of. The man could have been some kind of contractor or liaison, one of those vague, official adjacent jobs that exist to smooth things along. But the name, I had no explanation for it. I still don't have one that fully satisfies me. The dash cam. I'd forgotten I had a dash cam. My dad installed it before I drove back to school last fall, one of those wide-angle ones that clips to the windshield. I pulled up the footage on my phone using the app when I got home that night. The detour sign was on the footage, the county road, the parked SUV, the man approaching my window. The audio was picking up a mild wind distortion, but I could hear the shape of the exchange. Hearing my name in his voice, detached from the moment, was different. It was worse. When the black vehicle passed, the camera caught it clearly. I paused the footage. No plates on the front. Tinted enough that I couldn't see anything through the glass. Just a shape, moving. My stop had lasted 12 minutes. The app showed it as a stationary hold at coordinates that, when I typed them into a map, landed me in an empty square of farmland with no roads nearby, which I know isn't right because I drove the road myself, but there it was. I don't know what was in that vehicle. I don't know who the man was. I don't know how he knew my name or who told him I'd be on that road or why a temporary detour sign had been placed on a state highway to route one car, possibly just my car, down a county road for 12 minutes on a Tuesday morning while something else passed through. I've looked at the footage more times than I should have. There's a moment just before I thank him that I keep going back to. The camera's wide angle, so it captures me from behind through the windshield. My hands on the wheel, the window down. The man is at the window, but mostly outside the frame. You can see his hand on my door, just resting there. One hand on the door of my car. It's a small detail, his hand on my door while he tells me I'm good to go. I've been thinking about what that gesture means, whether it's just how people stand, whether it means he was steadying himself, or whether it means something else, whether it was a kind of confirmation, Fingers on the car, the person inside verified, the moment complete. I think about the fact that I said thank you. I think about the fact that I meant it. What I keep returning to, the thing that sits with me when I'm trying to sleep, isn't the vehicle or the sign or even the name. It's the word planned. He said it was a planned interruption, not an emergency, not a delay. Planned. Like it had been decided somewhere, before I turned right, before I woke up that morning, before I made the choice to stay one extra night for the casserole. Like the timing of it, my timing, my car on that road at that moment had been known in advance. And I can't figure out if that should scare me more or less than the alternative. The alternative being that I was incidental, that it wouldn't have mattered which car stopped at that cone, that anyone would have done. I still don't know which one I'd prefer. There's something in my glove box that I should have thrown away by now. I've thought about it. Every time I reach in there for something else, I feel it before I see it. I haven't thrown it away. I'm 34 years old and I sell industrial HVAC equipment for a living, which means I spend more time in my car than most people spend in their homes. I know rest stops the way other people know their own kitchens. The rhythm of them, the smell, the particular fluorescent hum that's the same whether you're in Ohio or Nevada. I'm not someone who gets spooked easily. I want you to understand that before I tell you what happened on I-80 coming back from Pittsburgh. It was President's Day weekend. I'd driven out Thursday to spend a few days with my brother and his family in Shadeside. Nothing remarkable, just dinner and some board games and watching his kids lose their minds over a light snowfall Saturday morning. I left Sunday afternoon instead of Monday because I wanted to beat the holiday traffic. I had the drive timed out. Get on 80 East, stop once around State College, be home by 10. The rest area I pulled into was mile marker 158 or 159, somewhere in there. I've passed through it dozens of times. It's one of the standard Pennsylvania Turnpike Authority setups: 2-lane entry, parking lot split between cars and trucks, a long single-story building with vending machines on the exterior and bathrooms inside, a little landscaped median with some benches nobody uses. I pulled in around 7:30. It was dark by then and cold, maybe 28 degrees. My back was stiff and I needed to use the bathroom and get a coffee from the machine. What I noticed first, before anything else, was the flags. Every single car in the lot, and I mean every one, maybe 15 vehicles total, had a small American flag tucked into the driver's side window. Not stuck to the glass with a suction cup, not on one of those little antenna mounts, actually tucked into the window, the way you'd place something there deliberately so it stood upright in the gap where the glass doesn't fully seal at the top. They were all the same size, the cheap paper and plastic kind you see at 4th of July parades, on little wooden dowels. I remember standing next to my car for longer than I should have, just looking at the lot. My first thought was that I'd stumbled into some kind of organized event, a club convoy, a veterans group, something like that. But the cars were all different. A minivan, a couple of sedans, a Subaru with a cracked bumper, a white pickup truck with out-of-state plates I didn't catch. No signage anywhere connecting them. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation. Someone was handing them out at the entrance. A promotion, an advocacy group, a roadside campaign of some kind. I'd missed the booth on the way in, or it had been packing up. I went inside. The building was quiet. Not just low-traffic quiet, genuinely particularly quiet. The vending machine in the vestibule was off, which I'd never seen before. The fluorescent overhead nearest the door was flickering in a slow, irregular pattern, and under it was a folding table with a plastic tablecloth that had nothing on it, just an empty table. There was a paper sign taped to the wall above it, black text on white, that read, "Thank you for your service," in all capitals. No logo, no sponsoring organization, nothing below it. A man in his 60s was sitting on the bench near the women's restroom, not doing anything. No phone, no newspaper. He was wearing a plaid coat, very clean, and he had one of the small flags on his knee, held loosely in both hands. When I walked in, he looked up at me and nodded, the kind of nod you give someone in a church hallway, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. I nodded back and kept walking toward the men's room. The men's room was at the far end of the building. On the way, I passed a hallway I don't remember being there before, on the left side, branching off from the main corridor. There was a sign above it on a standing placard, the kind hotels use outside conference rooms, black plastic with white removable letters. It said, "Executive Facilities," with an arrow pointing down the hall. The hallway itself was dim, not dark, but dim, and I could see it turned a corner maybe 20 feet in. I stopped and looked at it for a moment. I've been through that rest stop probably 30 times over the years. There is no hallway on the left side of the building. The main corridor goes straight through to the men's room on one end and the women's room on the other, with the vending alcove in the middle. That's the entire building. There is no room for a branching hallway on the structural left side without it running directly into the parking lot. I didn't go down it. I'm not sure I could have explained why. I used the bathroom, which was empty and normal, and I washed my hands and looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. I felt genuinely uneasy in a way I couldn't justify. Nothing had happened. A parking lot had decorative flags. A sign was advertising some facility I didn't recognize. There was an empty table and an old man on a bench. These were not threatening things. On my way back through the corridor, I slowed when I reached the hallway again. I could hear, very faintly, something from around the corner. Not voices, not music, more like a low, sustained ambient sound. The kind of white noise a large HVAC unit makes when it's cycling, which I am obviously familiar with. A steady, low, slightly textured hum, and underneath it, or maybe just my brain constructing something, what might have been movement, weight shifting on flooring. The man was still on the bench when I passed back through the vestibule. He was looking at the door, not at me. I got a coffee from the machine in the exterior vestibule, that one was working, and I went back to my car. There was a flag in my window. I had been inside for maybe 7 minutes. I had parked in a section of the lot that was not heavily populated. 2 cars down from me on the left, nothing on my right. No one was visible near my vehicle. The flag was placed identically to all the others, inserted into the gap at the top of the driver's side window, upright, the little wooden dowel resting on the inner seal. I took it out. I held it in my hand. It was the same cheap paper print, the kind you can buy in bulk for about $1 a dozen. No writing on it, no note anywhere. I put it on the passenger seat and sat there for a minute with the engine running. I looked at the building. The flickering light near the entrance had stopped. Through the glass vestibule doors, I could see the man on the bench was gone. The folding table was gone too, and the sign above it, though I couldn't be completely certain of that last part given the distance and the light. I've gone back and forth about whether any of this is actually explainable. The flags, someone could have walked the lot while I was inside, placing them quickly for any number of benign reasons. A political demonstration, a social art project, a coordinated act of patriotism I simply wasn't aware of. The hallway, buildings get renovated. I may have simply never been in that specific rest area before and conflated it with a different one, or misremembered its layout. The man on the bench, he left when I was in the bathroom, which is what people do at rest stops. These explanations are all available to me, and I have used them. What I can't account for, and what still sits wrong when I think about it, is the dashcam footage. I have a Van-True unit that records continuously, wide angle, mounted to my windshield. I reviewed the footage when I got home that night because I was still unsettled, and I wanted to see if I could catch who placed the flag. The lot footage is clear. You can see me walk to the building, you can see the door, you can see me come back out 7 minutes later. No one approaches my car during those 7 minutes. The camera angle covers the full driver's side. No figure passes through frame. The flag is not in the window when I leave the car. The flag is in the window when I return to it. There is no moment in between when it appears. It does not appear gradually. It is simply not there, and then in the next frame, it is there. Same as all the others. I don't have a good explanation for that. The other thing I noticed when I reviewed the footage a second time, I almost missed it, it's in the background, is one of the other parked cars. A dark sedan, 4 spaces to my left. In the footage from when I first arrive, there's a person sitting in the driver's seat. You can see the outline, a head and shoulders just sitting there. I didn't notice that car when I pulled in. When I come back out 7 minutes later and get in my car, I turn my head slightly and the dash cam catches that sedan in the background again. The person is still there, same position, not on a phone, not moving, just sitting. I didn't recognize that as strange until I was watching the footage. And when I went back through the earlier part of the drive, just to orient myself, I found the segment from about 40 minutes before I reached the rest stop. Just highway, nothing notable, and in the background, a few car lengths behind me, there's a dark sedan. I can't confirm it's the same one. I want to be honest about that. I can't confirm it, but it's the same make, same color, same general profile, and it's there, just sitting in traffic behind me at a steady distance, not passing, not falling back. I've driven that stretch of 84 times since then. I haven't stopped at that rest area again. Last time I went past it, I slowed down slightly without meaning to and looked at the lot. And it was normal. Half full, no flags, a family unloading near the entrance, everything exactly as it should be. I still have the flag. It's in my glove box. I've taken it out a few times to look at it. It's identical to every cheap promotional flag I've ever seen. There is absolutely nothing unusual about it. I just can't figure out who put it there.